Now we will turn it over to David, who is going to talk about engineering in Kentucky and some analysis and labor market information and program demand.
So good morning. I want to introduce my colleague from the Emsi organization, Anna Brown. She's going to tell you a little bit about the Emsi organization that we partnered with for the study and a little bit about her personal background. We began this study in the fall, and we're giving you guys a sneak peek on some of the big takeaways, and you'll see the full rollout in April. But for now, we want to make sure that we effectively communicate some of the important things in terms of the engineering sector, the growth projections in that area, and the supply of Kentucky graduates. So Anna, if you're on the line, could you just give a little background on the Emsi organization that we partnered with and why that was important for the research in this area?
Sure thing. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So Emsi, we have been a company. We were established in around 2001, and we are a labor market data software and consulting firm. We were originally established to conduct economic impact studies, and through that process, we determined that we were also good at gathering labor market information. So we have been building upon that framework over the last almost 20 years. And we work with higher education institutions as well as businesses, economic development organizations, workforce investment boards, and more. And our primary goal is to use labor market data and software to connect and inform people, education, and in business. Our data covers around 99% of the workforce, and this includes a combination of traditional labor market data from government sources such as the Bureau of Economic Analysis and the Census. But we also couple that with real-time demand from job postings data, which also helps us get more granular in the types of demand that employers are requesting. And then we also provide a look via online profiles and resumes into the type of jobs and opportunities that alumni are in. So with those different lenses, we have a fairly robust picture of the labor market across a state, across a region. We can get quite granular with that.
And I want to thank Anna because this is specific time for her, and so this is first thing in the morning, and not even a chance to get coffee, before she jumps into a presentation. So
I've had 2 cups already, so I'm ready.
Yeah. So the research question is pretty simple, and it really aligns well with our discussions of new program proposals this morning. So are there misalignments between workforce demand and the supply of Kentucky graduates in this engineering area? So as you're looking down these 5 topics that we're going to cover today, you may recall a study about 10 years ago with our sister agency, then KSUS, KY Stats now, it's Kentucky Center for Workforce Education Statistics, where the conclusions were a bit troubling 10 years ago, that we talked a lot about losing our Kentucky trained engineers to out-of-state employment offers because of wages and career opportunities, and we were really projecting a problem in terms of gaps in skill sets and needs in the workforce in Kentucky because we were losing so many engineers. The good news that we'll share with you today is that we've recovered a bit from that, and our engineering retention is quite high compared to other states, and our wages are pretty healthy and competitive with our surrounding states as well. So we'll go into those details. So just a bit about design. You guys are familiar with these 4 workforce planning regions, WPRs. One change that we did make is we teased out Louisville from the central region so that we could look at Kentucky metropolitan areas separately in terms of Lexington and Louisville. We also asked Anna and her team to break this out by region so it would be more actionable. So in the bigger report that you're going to see, you can read up on any particular region and the projected number of new jobs and what type of gaps there would be in terms of graduates to fill those jobs, by SIP and by occupation code. So it's very, very fine-tuned, and there's about 200 pages of data in the report. So I'm going to let Anna take you through this slide. This is one of my favorite slides because it really gives you a sense for who's hiring our Kentucky engineers.
So what we've done with this slide is before we really got into looking at the demand for programs, we wanted to have an understanding of the industries that are driving the demand. And so this is, we tried to be as visual as we could with looking across the state, what type of engineering is driving each region. And so what we saw is that engineering services in general was a very high employer of engineers. And engineering services, this includes different types of engineers such as mechanical and civil, and those who are specifically being contracted to work for providing advice, for doing feasibility studies and so forth. But we also see that engineers are quite, that they are in other types of industries as well, so beyond just engineering services. And so while engineering services is a top industry employing engineers across the state, we see that in, for example, the South, that the automotive, there's a bit of a niche in automobile parts manufacturing. We see in the West that the federal government, especially with the military bases, that they employ quite a bit of engineers. We also see a lot of state government across the East and in the central WPR. And so across the board, depending on where you are in the state, there's different types of needs for different types of engineers. And so what we tried to do within this analysis was pull out those nuances across the board.
So a bit of background on projections of job growth. This slide is overall projections, US versus Kentucky, which subsumes the engineering sector within. But you note that our projections are not quite as favorable as the overall growth. But this compared, so if you compare 23% to, from 2009 to 2029 to 15%, the engineering market looks a lot more favorable for Kentucky. And so we're right in line with national growth projections. If you're wondering about total market for engineers, you can see in that smaller print down there, if you have a chance to read it, that in 2019, it was just over 27,000 jobs. And we are looking at over 29,000 jobs in engineering in Kentucky by that 2029 rate, 2029 year. And so that's what gets us to the overall 28% growth from 2009 to 2029. So, pretty much a good news slide. I'd like to show this comparison of Kentucky graduates in engineering fields to the average annual number of job openings by occupation. I think we should spend the most time on this slide just so you get a good sense for where we are projecting these growths. And I'll have Anna jump in here, but you note that, manufacturing, as we just discussed with the UK folks, manufacturing is still driving many job opportunities. So you see there at the very top, the manufacturing, engineering, technology technician, there's a big gap there. Certainly engineering technology, the next row. And then, of course, the industrial engineering is still a big growth area for us as well. It should be noted that civil engineering continues to be very healthy, and there's going to be many opportunities. And this plays back into the needs in the state and the federal government that you noted in the previous slide by geography. So the big takeaways here are certainly that manufacturing is going to continue to drive a lot of job opportunities in the state of Kentucky. The other question I had for Anna initially, and I think is important for you guys to note is, so just because an occupation shows a big gap doesn't necessarily mean that a new program should be proposed from an institution to fill that gap in immediately. It could be that, for example, mechanical engineers and expansion in existing programs can fill some of the need in areas such as manufacturing technology or other manufacturing opportunities. Anna, is there anything that you want to add on this slide?
I think you covered it really well, David. If anything, I think I want to touch just briefly on the methodology of how we came up with these, and just very high level. What we did was we looked across by zip code all of the programs offered by the universities, and also and that way we're able to take into consideration all of the completions that each university is providing, and then we map that to the types of occupations that graduates would likely be going into. And so when we look at this, we're trying to take a fairly comprehensive look across all of the, not just all the demand, but also all of the supply, since there are some programs that are offered at multiple institutions. So that way we just have that overarching look there.
Yeah, and I should note, and I'm not sure I did, that this is baccalaureate or higher graduates. And so we certainly spent a good time in the report on associate level and sub-associate credentials so that we could help inform the KCTCS folks in the state. But I wanted to start with this, this notion, as we had initially described, of baccalaureate completers in engineering being poached a bit by other states and what that's going to look like. So I just want to make that clear. And as we look at this job demand, these job growths yearly, some of those projections are based on a graying out of particular areas of our engineering workforce. And so this is industrial engineers by age. And you can see how we skew larger with that group that's over 45 and even up above 65. So, that within that 2029 time frame, we are going to see more retirements. And if you look in the notes at the bottom, you can see that's true with electrical engineers and architectural and engineering managers and others. And so some are more leveled out. You can see the mechanical is probably our best proportionally distributed across the age ranges, but certainly there's going to be need based on the aging or the graying out of Kentucky workforce engineers. So this slide is the one that I referenced at the beginning of our presentation, that are we retaining Kentucky engineers, and how does that compare to other states? And so the good news here is that 54% of Kentucky graduates stay in the state to work in some capacity. That compares to 43% nationally stay in their home state. So we are quite healthy here. And we asked Anna to break this out by bordering states. And so I can just tell you that, we're quite competitive. Indiana is only at 38%. Illinois is at 45%, Virginia is at 41%, Missouri at 52%, West Virginia at 27%. And we're about the same as Tennessee and Ohio at that 54%. So this is a really important takeaway for us to understand if we're keeping these engineers, in the state after really a pretty pricey investment in their training for our institutions. And what plays into it is these median salaries, and we took 6 states that we felt like were important comparison benchmarks, and we looked at 2019 salaries, and then on the next slide we'll look at 2009 salaries. But if you focus just on one area, and let's just look at, say, engineering with mechanical, you can see that our median salary in 2019 was about $85,000. That ranks us number 2 amongst these 6 states. And these are some pretty healthy economies in areas like Texas and Florida. And so, we feel like we're certainly very healthy, and that's relative to, these 2009 salaries, where if you look at mechanical, and you see that we were 5th amongst these states. And then you look at the other rankings, 6, 5, 5, 4, 5. We've made a lot of progress in our salaries over the 10-year period. And I feel like that's a really important takeaway as we, address that idea of whether we're able to compete to keep our engineers in the state after they graduate. So I'll finish up with the summary, and then I'd like to open it up for questions so Anna can answer, any research design questions, what else is in the report kind of question that might be very instructive for this group as we think about new academic programs and that you guys have these conversations on a very regular basis. So I got two slides here. One is just the overall contextual picture. And again, we, as a state, job growth looks like it is significantly in the national picture, but we are more competitive in our engineering sector. Our wages have improved over the 10 years, and we are retaining more engineers, and that's certainly the good news slide. But there is, certainly gaps and opportunities to expand existing programs or improve new ones. And then we should note that the population growth continues to be a challenge for Kentucky in terms of our economy. So you'll see in the bigger report that we project out a 6% increase in population growth in Kentucky relative to 11% nationally. And you guys well know the attainment challenges that we have had as we rolled out our 60 by 30 goal to by the year 2030 to get 60% of our Kentucky residents and working age population to have some post-secondary credential. We've progressed there, but we continue to remain behind the national average. And then finally, with those opportunities in manufacturing, you're going to see a good deal of language around unemployment being high in Kentucky for manufacturing, but that's that classic divide of highly skilled labor and automation versus the lower skilled folks, and unemployment being much higher for the latter of those two. So I broke this into two takeaways. For the baccalaureate, the gap in this manufacturing area, manufacturing technology is significant. There will also be continued opportunities for growth in civil engineering. Again, those skills are often transferable across disciplines within these zip codes. And so, it might be that mechanical engineers have many different opportunities in manufacturing, not necessarily just limited to, the classic mechanical engineering occupations. And then we certainly do not want to talk about KCTCS in a limited way because there's so much in the report there to discuss, but it's a little more nuanced and detailed, and we'll be working directly with their workforce folks and leadership within the various colleges within KCTCS. But one bigger takeaway is that this need for quality control folks in manufacturing area continues to be quite high. The challenge is that much of that training is going on site at the employer facility and not necessarily from third-party training providers. And so KCTCS certainly has opportunities there to continue to work with these folks, but we do see a big gap in this quality control technician area that's still quite a big need for our private sector partners. So with that, let me just open it up for questions. We covered quite a bit in a short period. And again, I hope this is a bit of a teaser so that you guys will spend more time with the report as it's rolled out. But we should have a little bit of time now for questions.
Okay, David, Bob Stott here. And I appreciate your comments about just the fundamental engineering degrees. Do you have any feel for how much educational effort is put in by the companies after they hire someone? In other words, the universities aren't going to prepare students for all the different jobs. How much on-the-job training occurs, or do you have any information on that?
Well, I think that was a bit outside the scope of the study, Dr. Stats, but I do think that's an excellent question because I feel like at the master's level, and there are quite a few gaps where employers do want master's level trained engineers, that much of it can be funded through the employers. And so I feel like those programs are in place for the most part. Anna, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, and I guess I will go back to David's. So we did not really look at how much training the employers are providing.
I know that, but it's
Here.
still
So yeah. But one thing that we did do is we did tailor the demand by the type of education required. And so, so when we're looking at the Bachelor's Plus, for example, we are looking at the demand for people with a bachelor's degree and higher. So, and so we're kind of baking that in a little bit to the results. But what we can do is we can take a look, I think, especially through the job postings data, and see if there's anything further we can provide around if there's for some of this demand, if the employers are providing training afterwards. So I'll see what I can tease out on that front.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any additional questions?
Okay, thank you. If not, I appreciate your time today, David and Anna.
Thank you.